Hi there, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Wednesday. Tonight, the fighter jet fight.
From an economic standpoint and a military cooperation standpoint, the F-35 has been a phenomenal success.
I can say that the Gripen fighter is a uniquely good aircraft.
Donald Trump's ambassador in Ottawa weighs in as Canada hosts a massive Swedish delegation promoting an alternative to America's F-35 fighter jet. What happens if the feds pull out of the F-35 program and go with the Gripen? Former Chief of Defense Staff Tom Lawson will be here, and we'll talk to Sweden's defense minister about exactly that. Then, the looming Epstein document dump.
This will not and cannot be the end of the work. We'll keep the pressure up.
We're going to take you south of the border with David Frum as we await Donald Trump's signature on a bill he spent months fighting. If he signs it, that means the release of all government documents of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein could come soon. Plus, cross-border policing.
I want to emphasize that our work is not done. Fugitive Ryan Wedding remains one of the top threats to Canadian public safety.
RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhem will join us in studio fresh off a plane from D.C. where he and the head of the FBI announced a massive slew of arrests linked to former Canadian Olympian and alleged drug lord Ryan Wedding. That interview is coming up a little bit later on in the show. First, though.
Canada's a sovereign nation. They will make up. Their minds as to what the best plan is for Canada. You heard my views on how to build our defense cooperation moving forward, which is to build on the strategy that we've had in place for 50 years. Interoperability, interchangeability, and joint. And those words are all there in describing exactly how the F-35, an international plane that Canada bought in from the beginning, that it characterized a hallmark of how defense cooperation between the U.S., Canada, and other countries really, really works well.
That's U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra weighing in on a Swedish charm offensive in Ottawa this week with Sweden's king and queen, as well as senior government ministers, all here to promote, in part at least, their Gripen fighter jet as an alternative as Canada reviews a deal to buy U.S.-made F-35s. The reason for that review? Trump's trade war on Canada. The review, though, opened a door for Sweden to pitch Saab's Gripen, and while Hoekstra didn't directly address the Nordic competitor, he did extol the virtues of the F-35 as he sees them. I put that view, one espoused by many in the military community here in Canada, to Sweden's defense minister when I spoke to him this morning. Have a listen.
I can say that the Gripen fighter is a uniquely good aircraft, and it's uniquely good also to be matched against the Russian Air Force capability. There's no, we're laser focused on what they're doing, and that's of course why the Ukrainians are very interested into the Gripen. And we're proud to, just a few weeks ago, the announcement by President Zelensky and my Prime Minister that we aim to strengthen the Ukrainian Air Force with up to 150 fighter aircraft, so all based on the Gripen Echo, and so it's a very good and it's a very agile fighter aircraft. It has a very good what's called a life cycle cost, which makes it efficient, and has a small logistical footprint, which actually makes it easy to operate as well. And then, of course, when we engage into this kind of cooperation, we're not looking for clients, we're looking for partners. And we need to find countries also who have a matching defense industrial base as well.
You can catch the full interview with Sweden's defense minister this weekend on Question Period. Here now, though, to talk more about the path forward for fighter jets is former Canadian Chief of Defense Staff, retired General Tom Lawson. Hi, General Lawson. It's good to have you on the program. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Vashi.
I want to disclose right off the top, and we've said this before, you advised for a period of time Lockheed Martin, the company behind the F-35s, but we have had on the show the past few days, major proponents of the Gripen, so I want to make sure that we sort of explore the other side of the argument as well. I know that you view the F-35 favorably. I'm not a military expert, you are. What is it about that fighter jet that you think would better serve Canada's military?
Well, it seems like such a complex file, doesn't it? People talk about trade benefits and they talk about how tough it would be to have two fleets with the Air Force. What it really comes down to is what you're asking, though, Vashi, and that is, what's the difference between the two aircraft? And your previous speaker, the defense minister there, will put on a great show. Saab and the entire country of Sweden is doing their best with an aircraft which is yesterday's technology tomorrow. It would saddle Canada with decades of aircraft that aren't a lot better than the F-18s that we're about to retire. The F-35 is the way ahead. It's a new fifth-generation aircraft with stealth and fusion. What that means is that you're not just buying an airplane, you're buying a network. So definitely there's a plane in there with a pilot in it, but it's connected to sensors on the ground, at sea, in space, doing things that no single fighter, like the F-18 or the Gripen E, can do on its own. That's the way ahead, and the F-35 is going to have thousands built over the lifetime. Many of those parts are going to come from Canada, where the Gripen is going to have hundreds, maybe.
So let me expand on some of the questions I think Canadians would have, which is we've just listened, as you pointed out, to the pitch from Sweden, and it's a huge contingent of people, everyone from the Queen and King all the way, through the government to the company itself. And their pitch is that it can fill the capability gap to the degree that the F-35 can. In layman's terms, General Lawson, what is it that Canada actually needs?
Yeah. So in layman's terms, we just don't have time to get into why the F-35 is such a more capable aircraft than the Gripen. I attempted to do it there with a little bit of a dialogue, but it's much more difficult. So what we really need to do is we need to trust the experts, the Canadian experts who have gone head-to-head in competition and looked at these two and came out with their recommendations, and they were clear. In Canada, as with every other country that have compared these two aircraft. If you listen to the excellent speaking Swedes and their test pilots, they will make it very difficult for you to, as a non-fighter pilot, to refute what they're saying. So go with the experts, go with what Canadians have found by looking at these two aircraft, and it puts the F-35 far ahead of the Gripen. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our pilots over the next 3 decades are available to fly aircraft that are going to be safe and effective in wartime situations. That's what it's all about when we're serious about defense.
I think if I understand the government's position right, the reason that they're even considering this is, of course, what's going on with Trump, right? With the trade war and the idea that his administration would take such direct aim at Canada, and then we would, continue on with this partnership. And I acknowledge, obviously, there are other countries involved with the F-35 as well. But the deal that we originally signed in 2023 was with the U.S. government and then the companies that are associated with it. Is there, in your view, an upside or a downside to more than one type of fighter jet? For example, if we were to split up the fleet, what does that look like from your perspective?
So it's quite simple. As a fighter pilot today, I would not want to take the Gripen to war. So there is no upside, I don't see, even if you could afford it, even if you had enough fighter pilots, even if you had enough technicians, by the way, which we don't on either of those counts. You would not want to have this aircraft if you were serious about flying it into a peer, China, Russia, or a non-permissive, threatening environment. So, for that very reason alone, and that's the main reason, you don't want to split fleets. The idea, however, of the challenge you would put to the RCAF, which is ailing, the same as the Navy and the Army, short of people. Back when I was a fighter pilot, we had a couple of hundred fighter pilots flying 3 different type of aircraft, very simple aircraft, but we had a couple hundred fighter pilots. We're down to fewer than 50 fighter pilots now. So many have gotten out. So to try and run the rest of your F-18s for the next few years while bringing on the F-35s that we're going to buy, and then ask the Air Force to run a second fleet, or in this case it would be a third fleet of aircraft, is a challenge that would just probably take 10 or 15 years. You'd have to park the second fleet of aircraft for some number of years.
I have just one final question for you, General, and I'll ask it as sort of, gently as I can, because I think, I've tried to get as much expertise as I can, because you're right. I'm nowhere near a fighter jet expert or anything close to it. And what I have seen is there seems to be a schism between people who are experienced in the military and their comfort level with interdependence with the United States and it remaining that way, and sort of the vast amount of knowledge and experience that we share as countries who have worked side by side for so long. And then the more political side of things, which is sort of has been woken up to a new reality that level of interdependence is maybe not the most sustainable thing. And I guess I wonder, is your view informed by, understandably, your experience, but that two things can be true at the same time? And the political view that is, the one espoused right now is also something we have to be cognizant of.
Oh, certainly. As a red-blooded Canadian, like others, the way we've been treated by the American administration is abominable, and I certainly applaud the Canadian government for looking to diversify how we spend our defense dollars. The problem here is this is a fleet of aircraft that for decades we've been planning to get, and we've actually helped with the development of this aircraft. It is the one available to us that will work for a couple of decades, for a few decades, and keep our pilots safe when they go to war. This is not where you want to play politics. There are a lot of other areas you could do that, but not in this one. And anybody who would be concerned about the fact that the Americans might decide not to give us the parts or the software for this aircraft, recognize, look, if the Americans want to protect North America under NORAD with us, the F-35, they're going to have to make sure it is up and running. As for our partners in NATO, there are all kinds of those partners who are also going to be flying the F-35. So this is a great jet to have when we want to interoperate over there too. Diversifying our defense dollars, absolutely. Trying to make sure we don't give as much to the United States, I'm with it. This is not the this is not the fleet that you want to do that with.
Okay, General Lawson, I'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much for your time and your insights tonight. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you.
General Tom Lawson was Chief of Defense Staff, and as we mentioned off the top, did serve as an advisor to Lockheed Martin, the company previously served as an advisor to Lockheed Martin, the company behind the F-35. Now, Ambassador Pete Huckstra also indicated this week was the week a deal would have been announced between Canada and the U.S. during those remarks he made that we showed you earlier on the program. We're going to talk about that and the political consequences of the fighter jet fight a little bit later on with our front bench. Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky will all be here. First, though, a bill that would force the U.S. Department of Justice to release all its files on sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is headed to Donald Trump's desk for him to sign. David Frum is my next guest.
Our promise to the victims and to the American people is this: this will not and cannot be the end of the work. We'll keep the pressure up, pressure for the President to sign, and then pressure on the DOJ to release the full, unredacted files.
We have released over 33,000 Epstein documents to the Hill, and we'll continue to follow the law and to have maximum transparency. Also, we will always encourage all victims to come forward.
Reaction in Washington after the House of Representatives and Senate both passed a bill to release all government documents related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. That bill is now headed to President Donald Trump's desk for his signature, but he only recently drastically changed his position on the release of the files against the backdrop of huge pressure from his supporters. And scrutiny on that led to this Oval Office exchange.
Mr. President, why wait for Congress to release the Epstein files? Why not just do it now?
You know, it's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question. And you could even ask that same exact question nicely. You're all psyched up. Somebody psychs you over at ABC. They're going to psych it. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. I think the license should be taken away from ABC because your news is so fake and it's so wrong.
Trump has said he intends to sign the bill, but what does the lead up to all of this tell us politically? With us to talk about that is The Atlantic's David Frum. Hi, David. It's good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Why did a simple question like that prompt that kind of response? Like, why is this such a sore spot for Trump?
Look, if everyone who's ever watched the old Scooby-Doo cartoon series knows that when the villain says, "Don't look in that closet," that's probably the closet in which you want to look. And so Donald Trump was telling our Scooby-Doo and our friends, don't look in that closet. That closet is very embarrassing. It makes me very upset when you look in that closet. So my guess is there's probably something pretty bad in that closet. And that's not just my guess, that's a lot of people's guess.
And why, I think the thing that has struck me most over the last number of weeks is Trump never blinks. He doesn't apologize. Yeah. He's been accused of so many different things, and he lets it stand on public record. This feels different, and is that because of the people who care about this issue and the number of them who comprise his base of support?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. This is a true cover-up. Trump doesn't usually do cover-ups. There's an allegation that he punched a baby in the face, and then he's asked about it, or he just goes on his social platform and says, yeah, I punched that baby in the face. The baby had it coming. The baby was insubordinate and churlish, and so of course I punched the baby in the face. In fact, and anyone who complains about baby punching is a rhino. In this case, he's acting much more like a typical politician in trouble. He's obfuscating and evading. Mm-hmm. Senator Schumer's statement, I think, really bears listening to very carefully. That the reason that Trump and the Republicans have flipped on this vote in the House of Representatives is because they've figured out a way to make sure it doesn't mean anything. That there'll be a vote in the House of Representatives. It's now passed the Senate. It will go to the president's desk, and the president will presumably sign the legislation. But the legislation is now riddled with loopholes, and Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, made it clear what those are. Trump ordered her to open investigations into Democrats who might be involved in the Epstein matter. And now she can say, once she's done that, well, I can't release materials because they implicate an existing investigation. There wasn't one 4 days ago, but now there is one, and that means I can't release everything because I have to protect the integrity of an investigation, when, of course, obviously what she's doing is concealing the documents that Trump wants concealed.
So do you think ultimately those documents will not be released?
I think there will be a real fight. Look, we don't know exactly. There's so much about this that is mysterious. There have been allegations, and there have been confirmations from some members of Congress who might be in a position to know that it's not just documents. There might also be videotapes, and that's one of the big questions. Did Jeffrey Epstein collect blackmail tapes? Because one of the big mysteries of this case is, how did Jeffrey Epstein make his money? He doesn't seem like a very reputable money manager, and yet powerful billionaires entrusted him with great amounts of money that he seems to have simply stolen. And they seem to have put up with it. Why? That's really odd. So there's a blackmail angle, there's a sex crimes angle, there's then who is in the network of people protecting him angle. There are a lot of mysteries here. And they implicate a lot of people, of whom Donald Trump might be one. There may be others. And there may be many kinds of factual materials in addition to documents. There may be videos, there may be other things too.
Do you think that his supporters, or previous supporters as to this up to this weekend, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people like that, like, do you think that they will allow for or sort of create a political climate in which it's okay that stuff does not come out, whatever it ends up being that stuff is?
That's such an interesting question, because the way to think about how people feel in the Republican world about this Epstein scandal is, I think we need to distinguish between here two groups, which are the MAGA Republicans who do whatever Trump wants. But then there's this kind of this other group who are into Trump because they've signed up for the QAnon conspiracy theory. And the QAnon conspiracy theory is almost a religion that holds powerful men are bound together in this predatory, vampire-like network of pedophiles who prey on children. And the Epstein case seems to vindicate that theory. Now, just it should be said, there's a lot of child abuse, and almost all of it is done by people who are known to the child. Children are at risk from members of their family, from their intimates, and if you want to protect them, you need it's not just shadowy, unknown people. You have to really protect the structure of the safety of children inside their homes. But the QAnon theory is that there's this network of predatory people. Epstein seems to put together just such a network. So you're asking not just them to show party loyalty to Trump, but you're asking them to disavow what has become a kind of religion. The Pizzagate, all of these stories were all based on this myth, which turns out to have some truth to it, of this network of pedophiles. And they look to Donald Trump to be their hero to save the children, when it turns out he's up to his eyeballs, or so he's acting.
I have time, David, for one last question. If you'll permit me to totally switch gears, because we're obviously thinking here in Canada about the prospect of a trade agreement and the fact that negotiations have completely fallen off. Completely fallen off. They've stopped. I was at an event today where I listened to the U.S. ambassador speak, Pete Huckstra, about it, where he accused Canada of attempting basically to interfere. And this is something the president had said before, attempting to interfere in their elections, with that Ronald Reagan ad. He intimated that the prospect existed for talks resuming, but that it would all be on Canada. The prime minister has apologized to the president for that ad. What is your assessment of the current state of this, and do you see it changing anytime soon?
I've been saying the same thing since Donald Trump was elected, that Canada needs to go slow. Donald Trump's position gets weaker every day. It may be weaker still once the Supreme Court hands down its ruling on the constitutionality of his purported tariffs. Remember, the president does not have tariff power. Congress does. Trump has seized on a 1970s law that doesn't give tariffs away to the president to create this new authority. And the Supreme Court is likely to say he doesn't have as much of that authority, or maybe any of it. The very fact that the ambassador and Trump are complaining so much about what Canada's doing tells you that it's working. These tariffs are unpopular. They're unpopular with the American people. They're unpopular with most of the governors. They're unpopular with many in the even in the Republican caucus. The more Canada, and they will become more unpopular in time. And he's now in the 30s. Why would you deal with him today when you know his word is no good, he doesn't abide by his commitments, and his position is deteriorating? The closer Canada does this deal to the November 26 elections, the better the deal, if any, is obtainable will be. So when they tell you you're doing it wrong, when the people who are aggressing against you tell you they don't like the defense, that tells you it's the right defense.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. David Frum is with The Atlantic. I'm going to turn now to a developing story. The RCMP has arrested 7 Canadians in connection with a major drug trafficking ring, allegedly headed by former Canadian Olympian Ryan Wedding. Wedding is accused of bringing large amounts of cocaine into the U.S. and Canada, and was allegedly involved in the murder of a witness in Colombia this year. In a joint announcement in D.C. today, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi said Wedding controls one of the most prolific and violent drug trafficking organizations in the world, while she announced new charges. Have a listen.
Today, we're unsealing a new indictment, charging Wedding with 2 additional counts of witness tampering and intimidation, murder, money laundering, and drug trafficking.
Wedding is on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, and the U.S. State Department is offering a reward of up to $15 million U.S. for information leading to his arrest. Pam Bondi says the new indictment includes several other individuals in connection with Wedding's alleged criminal enterprise.
This is an indictment, an additional indictment, an arrest of multiple subjects, nearly a dozen more, and that brings the total to approximately 36 indicted.
Now, RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhem was in D.C. alongside those officials for the announcement. He's just landed back in Ottawa and is here in studio with us. Hi, Commissioner. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much for making the trip an extra long one.
You're welcome, Betsy.
I wanted to start off because I heard you say today that Ryan Wedding remains one of the top threats to Canadians' public safety. Why?
Yeah, it's just the whole way his organization operates, extreme violence. You've heard of the charges that have been, the indictments that have been brought forward: murder, conspiracy to commit murder. And it's not because someone's in hiding that operation all of a sudden just disappears. He still has contacts. Now we have to assess with this latest round what the impact's going to be to his organization. But until this person's behind bars, we still consider him as a significant threat.
I know you've been monitoring sort of the web throughout Canada and the United States. When you talk about his network, How, until today, like until these arrests were made, would you describe it as evolving into an even more dangerous, bigger presence? Like, how would you describe it?
I would say it's a web that he had internationally. He was his cocaine was coming from Colombia, so therefore he had contacts in Colombia. He had contacts in Mexico because that's where he's at, and that's where some of his cocaine from Colombia would come to Mexico. And then you'd have the people that are distributing the drugs, and in the States and Canada as well. And then you have the enforcers. Anybody who got in his way, he would do anything that he can to eliminate the person.
And when you, or the FBI, I should say, today you didn't describe it, but the director of the FBI described him as a modern-day Pablo Escobar. Do you think that's accurate?
I think that's accurate. When you look at the quantity that he was bringing in, we figured out with the FBI that he was bringing in, I think Madame Bondi mentioned 60 metric tons of cocaine in a year. He's running a $1.3 billion criminal enterprise. So that is up to what the comparison that Mr. Patel did.
And you mentioned like the extent of his network, through Colombia, through Mexico. I think for Canadians watching tonight, they're wondering, considering especially you characterize him as a threat to Canadian public safety, like what is the presence like, to your knowledge, and obviously you've made arrests, but what is the presence like in Canada?
There's affiliation sometimes with different street gangs. And most of the times, I want to reassure the Canadians that these crimes are being committed from organized crime to organized crime groups. They're not just going to, there has been some accidents. There has been one or two that, to my knowledge, but for the most part, they're going after other gang members because they're either interfering in the business or not cooperating with the business.
So what is the public, because there was a significant, a couple who was murdered basically, who had nothing to do with anything, and their daughter was critically injured. Like, what is the threat as you would describe it outside of that? Like, is it the cocaine? Is it just the criminal activity?
The cocaine's one of them, and if you have drugs, obviously you have the criminal activity that comes with it. And again, I go to what I mentioned earlier. There have been 7 charges with regards to conspiracy to commit murder, and also some murders that were committed. So, as I said, he is running a business, and anybody who interferes with his business, they're either in the business or they're not, and he will eliminate them.
How far do you feel you permeated that business in Canada with these arrests?
There's a significant impact. There'll be a greater impact once we locate Wedding and arrest him. We were in Mexico in September, and we met with the equivalent of Minister of Public Safety, and we shared with him our interests and obviously the FBI's interest in locating Wedding.
What is the reception to that interest in Mexico?
They're collaborative, but as the FBI agent said today on the phone on the press conference, where they did say that he is protected also by the Sinaloa cartel. So that just shows you where he's at in the hierarchy when it comes to cartels. When you have a $10 million reward that's now up to $15 million reward and no one's coming further, that's because he's still making probably good business for the cartels. There's not a threat to the cartels.
And forgive me if I'm incorrect, but is that not the cartel that was very recently in Canada deemed to be a terrorist organization?
Sinaloa was listed as a terrorist entity.
So how serious is his association with them?
Well, it would be for us to demonstrate the association, and you could lay terrorist charges if he's supporting a terrorist entity that's listed in Canada.
And why is it because of that protection that it has been so difficult to find him?
It's challenging when you want to hide somewhere like in Mexico in the mountains or somewhere. It could be challenging at times. You need the right information, the right technology to be able to identify exactly pinpoint where he's at.
And what kind of communication? Like I hear you say that the Mexican authorities are collaborative, but like obviously you and the FBI are working very close together. What can you tell Canadians about the level of collaboration or communication with Mexico as well, like in the effort to actually get him?
Yeah. So when you look at, just before getting to him, when you look at the overall involvement of the RCMP across Canada, but we also had our office in Los Angeles, our office in Bogota, and our office in Mexico that were involved. When we were there in September with the meeting with the Mexicans, they said it was one of their priorities. So I trust them when they say it's one of their priorities. We are working together with the FBI and the Mexican authorities.
I'm sure you can't divulge, necessarily all the details, but do you feel that there is like it could be close that you could find him, or is it like nobody has any idea where he is in Mexico?
Well, the fact that the reward just went up to $15 million, that could be enough to entice someone to come forward with some information, some credible information as to where he's located at, and that's what we want. We don't want anybody to intervene. We want them to report it to the FBI hotline that they have, and let the professionals look after the rest.
And do you know when the last time he was in Canada?
I'm not quite sure the last time he was in Canada. It's important to note that he was on our radar in 2015, where we laid charges against him, and then that's when he went to Mexico and hid in Mexico for several years, and actually worked under another alias, and we had just lost track of him, and then he resurfaced recently in 2023, for which we began the investigation with the FBI.
And what was sort of like the hinge moment for this series of arrests and this announcement today? Like, was it his involvement, alleged involvement in the witness, the murder of the witness? Like what sort of?
No, often there's a planning phase that goes in when we do the arrests and lay charges, and often you could do the first phase, and then when you arrest people, seize phones, seize computers, it brings it to other charges and whatnot. So this was just planned as a phase one would be this, and the next phase would be what we saw today.
And what's the next phase?
Oh, it's catching wedding.
So that's
arresting wedding.
Do you think that like I ask genuinely, like, is there? You think this is like you've got the network and now it's all about getting him?
It's about getting him. It's about getting him. Who he is. Let's face it. When you are importing 60 metric tons of cocaine.
Can I ask a stupid question? Like how much is that in comparison to what gets trafficked?
I think Attorney General Bondi mentioned something like it would be the equivalent of 40 cars, the weight of 40 cars or 45 cars. I forget, but I didn't do math exactly with that. But it's a significant amount. But you can imagine that amount that's coming into Canada was not only coming into one organized crime group. Like he most likely had the whole control of cocaine coming into Canada to different organized crime groups.
And is he the largest cocaine, I guess, drug trafficker in Canada?
He is. I would, based on the intelligence we have right now, he is the biggest.
And what about the ability to get? Because I listened to Attorney General Bondi talk about this too, like the way that he's utilizing, trucks, for example, to get the cocaine into Canada. Like, what are we doing on that front?
Yeah, it's well known to us that there's some investigations that are ongoing, but the method of using a truck to bring cocaine, meth into Canada is known. It's a matter of us getting the right intelligence and targeting the companies that are actually doing that.
And do we have the resources? I guess it's not just the RCMP, it's the CBSA, but we've made promises to increase resources at the border, that kind of thing. Like, could that help?
Yeah, it's a collective effort. If we have information that a certain type of vehicle is coming and CBSA is coming at a point of entry, we will work with CBSA and share the information and make sure that we can stop it. Or sometimes there's different techniques where we want to follow where it goes. So,
do you think that the arrest today and the sort of clamping down on the Canadian aspect of the network will have a germane impact on the amount of cocaine trafficked through Canada?
I think it will have an impact for sure because you're destabilizing his network. Now, how strong is his network that we're not aware of? That's another thing. But what was done in October 2024 and what was done today is certainly destabilizes his network.
So I have one final question for you on sort of the relationship with the FBI, with Pam Bondi. Like, you mentioned October 2024 when I think the first announcement was about collaboration. A lot has changed since then, right? On the political side of things, and I understand that you're not political, but I think a lot of Canadians are interested to know, like, did anything happening politically ever affect the relationship, or how would you characterize the way in which you work with the FBI?
No, we have a really good relationship with the FBI. We have a good relationship with the Custom Border Agency, Border Patrol, DEA. And people are coming together because they want to get the job done. Right, they're true professionals. Whatever happens in the political world, it's different. Law enforcement come together and they want to share information. They want to share intelligence. You see, this is a good example of how we're sharing intelligence, expertise to come to a successful conclusion once we arrest Mr. But it's like that in different files that we have as well.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that despite all the stuff that has changed, would you describe your relationship with the FBI, with the Attorney General?
So I don't deal a lot with the Attorney General.
Okay, the FBI,
but
let's say.
But the FBI, the relationship is very strong, very strong.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Commissioner Duhem, thanks for coming in.
Thanks,
I appreciate it very much. Commissioner Mike Duhem with the RCMP. On the other end of a short break, we've got some more developing news. Sources tell CTV that Alberta and Ottawa are just days away, potentially, from a memorandum of understanding on pipelines. Our front bench, Sharon Carr, Sebastian Skamsky, Laura D'Angelo, and Jamie Ellerton are here to talk about that next.
June of 2014, the Conservative government approved a pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific. November 29, 2016, this Liberal government canceled that pipeline. Will the Prime Minister admit that he was wrong?
The Prime Minister and the Premier have publicly stated they're having productive discussions on advancing an MOU between Canada and Alberta. When the Prime Minister and the Premier are ready to make an announcement, they will to all Canadians.
Well, we're hoping the Prime Minister will announce that he was wrong, and that the Liberal government was wrong to kill the Northern Gateway pipeline.
Not a single energy exporting tidewater piece of energy infrastructure was ever constructed under a Conservative government.
Pipeline politics in the House of Commons today as Ottawa and Alberta inch toward a deal. Sources tell CTV News that the province and the federal government are days away from announcing a memorandum of understanding that would include changes to the industrial carbon price and support Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's proposed bitumen pipeline all the way to the West Coast. But the issue does remain contentious within the Prime Minister's own cabinet.
I think the Prime Minister was pretty clear that projects would need the support of the jurisdictions in which they're being built. So I think there's got to be some conversations with the Premier. And in terms of First Nations, I mean, there needs to be significant support. It doesn't necessarily have to be unanimous. It wasn't in the case of Trans Mountain, but there needs to be significant support. And at the present time, I don't think there is.
All right, let's bring in our front bench to talk about this. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst and former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Next to her, that's Sebastian Skamsky. He was a former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Laura D'Angelo is here in studio. She's with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. And rounding us out, Jamie Ellerton is the principal at Kanaptis and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Jamie, I'll start with you. Interesting sort of series of events that feel about to happen. Let's start with the possibility of an actual MOU, right? And that in that MOU, the Carney government expresses support for a new pipeline to Tidewater in BC. How big of a deal do you think that is?
I think it's a massive deal. I think that's great news for Canada, and I think it's great news for Canadian unity. Obviously, there's going to be complicated politics, as pipeline politics always have been in this country. But the fact that you have Premier Danielle Smith and Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney about to sign a deal that'll lead to Tidewater pipelines to get more of Canadian energy to market is fantastic news for the country and for the country's economy.
Is it surprising at all to you, Laura, having lived through the last government, apparently in the next 2 days, with the caveat that you never know if the end of the negotiations goes sideways, but everyone on both sides I talked to today seemed very optimistic. I should point out the Globe first reported it this morning. Is that surprising to you at all?
It certainly is one of the moments over the past few months that to me have really illustrated wow, we're in a whole new world, right? Everything has changed. So it's not surprising for Prime Minister Carney to me, right? He's been very clear that Canadian unity and making Canada an energy superpower are two of his really big goals. So that isn't super surprising to me. What I do keep asking myself today, though, is how do Conservatives square this circle? Because the Liberal guy is doing stuff that they probably like, or at least don't hate, that we know their constituents like, we know Alberta likes, and all of a sudden, you're left kind of on your back foot, right? So where does this leave the Conservatives moving forward?
Well, I have two questions. I have that question, Sebastian, I'll ask you, and then I'll split the difference and ask Sharon where that leaves Liberals like Jonathan Wilkinson, who you could kind of physically see have some discomfort with the idea. The response, Sebastian, from the Conservatives seemed to be great, but now just admit you're wrong.
Well, I think it leaves Conservatives with wanting more. It is nice to see that Prime Minister Carney is yet again exercising the use of his pen. It's almost running out of ink, seeing all the papers he's signed. But again, very little has actually been built. Again, I think we need to recognize this as an admission of or rather a recognition of the shortcomings of the Liberal policies. Why is it that Prime Minister Carney has to sign a memorandum of understanding, a complete separate set of rules for this one single pipeline to potentially maybe be built at some point? Shouldn't this be really a recognition that perhaps ludicrous policies like the self-defeating tanker ban off our west coast is perhaps what is keeping many projects from being built? I don't think we should be cheering for just one. I think we, as Conservatives should be pushing Prime Minister Carney and the Liberals to really recognize that the whole suite of their policies are making it impossible and uncompetitive for that kind of investment and infrastructure to be built in Canada.
Let's talk for a second about the tanker ban, because I think that will be the most kind of politically controversial part of this. If, in fact, Sharon, the Prime Minister in this MOU expresses support for an exemption for a pipeline heading west, Premier Eby in BC has been pretty unequivocal that he says that would threaten LNG deals that he's made with First Nations, who predicated their support on the fact that that tanker ban even existed. How do the Liberals square that circle?
Well, I think this is a moment where Prime Minister Carney is going to have to come in and kind of bring everyone together in a bit of a kumbaya moment. We've seen Premier Eby be pretty unequivocal around his views on this, and I think we have to remember that we are at a period of time where we're finally talking about actually getting our resources to market. We have had this fluctuation around different provinces having different views, and right now I think BC is the outlier, and there are things like the tanker ban. But I just want to go back to the importance of what this MOU is and what it could be. For the longest time, we saw the most adversarial relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. We saw the tone and tenor that Danielle Smith had towards the previous Prime Minister and the government, and we're not hearing that now. We even see Alberta as a proponent. Now, we do have the issue of how do we handle Premier Eby and his concerns, and I think this is where Prime Minister Carney is going to have to kind of be the adult at the table and say, we're in this huge conversation about sovereignty and actually pulling our resources out to be our own superpower. And in order to do that, yes, we have to care about Indigenous rights and Indigenous consultation and all these other deals, but we have to look at the bigger picture, and we're in a moment of unity, and I think we cannot lose sight of that.
I understand the logic of that argument, but maybe Premier Eby is the new Premier Smith. Insofar as, like, the last 10 years, it didn't matter. You know, Premier Smith was very against what Prime Minister Trudeau did on the energy front. Like, David Eby did not give me the impression over the past few months that his position was, well, maybe. Like, it was unequivocal. So I understand that everyone's optimistic about an MOU, but, like, MOU into action feels like something that won't be easy.
Is that one for me?
Jamie.
Oh, Jamie.
Sorry, Vash, I wasn't sure if you were following up with Sharon there.
Jamie,
listen, I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think this is actually where Mark Carney is literally rebuilding a political coalition and a political consensus in this country with these projects. And the longer he is Prime Minister, day by day making progress on this, it's going to be harder to run the same script of 5-10 years ago and pretend as if the Conservative Party is still just running against Justin Trudeau. And so I think when you look at the state of kind of Canadian public opinion and the state of the country and the need for real investment and economic growth in this country, I think previous political, like, sacred cows, if you will, to mix my metaphors here, are things that get slayed because people see what's needed and what's possible and see a path forward for it. And so undoubtedly, the kind of a more ardent environmentalist progressive wing of the Liberal Party and in the provincial NDP in BC are going to make noise about this, but I don't think that necessarily is going to be winning politics for them either. And so I think a lot of this is going to get rewritten, and kind of political consensus, political assumptions based off of what the past 10, 15 years of pipeline politics history were, is potentially actually being rewritten. And I think if you're the Conservative Party right now trying to just look backwards and criticize Liberals' past, like, accept that you've won the argument and be constructive as how you're going to get there better and find better ways to hold the government to account. How do we get this so that an MOU that'll have the Cabinet Office in Alberta and the Privy Council coordinating all their government departments to actually deliver on something real actually leads to real results? It doesn't sound, to use Sharon's favorite word on this panel, sexy, but that kind of literal leadership at head of government to get every department and every agency rowing in the same direction so we can actually get new things done on this creates that political permission for down the road to repeal things like C-69 and the tanker ban. And I would point out, like, former Minister James Moore has been quite public about this. There's only a tanker ban for ships originating from the Canadian coast. International ships go up and down that coast nonstop. And so I think having a more informed, factual debate on this will make it easier to get energy to market and to help both proponents of the industry, the Canadian economy, and for the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta to make that case to Canadians directly.
What about, Laura, what I mentioned earlier and we heard from Jonathan Wilkinson, there was a French clip today from Stephen Guilbeault who looked like, it's not like he had the pom-poms out to cheer for it. Like, there are a lot of people, I'm sure many of whom you worked for, who will feel naturally hesitant about this.
There is no question that pipeline politics in Canada, but specifically in the Liberal Party, is very challenging and a lightning rod. But I think Sharon and Jamie touched on two phrases that keep coming up today. One is adult in the room. And right now, Prime Minister Carney has to be the adult in the room, whether that's between BC and Alberta and making sure they both feel like their economic interests are being represented, or in caucus, making sure that he is finding a way to bring that caucus together is really important. And the other piece of this is something Jamie said, which is public opinion. And we can call it public opinion, we can call it social license, but right now, Canadians are overwhelmingly supportive of trying to find responsible ways to get resources to market because of the economic moment we're in. And it would actually be pretty irresponsible for Prime Minister Carney to not try to find ways to navigate through that and use that for the betterment of the whole country.
What is the way to navigate it through BC, though? Again, I'll circle back, Sebastian, too. Like, I don't want to diminish, just because I've interviewed him on two occasions where it was like very clear that David Eby was not going to be sort of half in, half out. He was really all the way out on the potential for this project. Like, what is the way through that, if there is one, in your view?
Certainly, I think it's political pressure. I mean, all of these people are obviously politicians. They're seeking to get reelected. And I think at a moment when they recognize that this is advantageous for them politically, I think they will recognize the merit of that. I think a problem is for a lot of these premiers and for the Prime Minister is they ran on the Team Canada banner, the hurrah, we're all in this together, let's hold hands and all run in the same direction. And the voters rewarded them for that. They loved that. They were clapping with their elbows. They were thrilled. So now when you have Premier Eby potentially saying, well, hold on, I don't actually want to be pro-Canada. I don't actually want to provide an opportunity for resources for the entire Confederation to be able to be accessed because of my specific politics and objections. Perhaps voters in BC will see that that is not something that they want. They maybe will want a return to that cooperation and to that positive team spirit that they all ran and won on in the past.
Maybe, but I keep hearing about the possibility of an early election because the NDP feels in BC, Sharon, that they have a better shot than they would have at any other time against a sort of downtrodden conservative opposition at the moment.
It's always an option. I think politics is always going to be kind of what leads this, but I do think that Premier Eby might be reading the room a bit wrong here. We have to remember that this whole concept of social license has shifted. The fact that we heard Quebec's Premier Legault, who was the province of Quebec has always been very challenging to build pipelines out that direction. We saw that when Energy East was trying to get built, and we recently heard him say social license might change. I think the same thing will happen in BC. I think when people, voters, Canadians see that this is not just a pipeline for the sake of it, it's for our own sovereignty and to build and get our markets to resource, to help Alberta prosper, to help other provinces prosper, I think that opinion changes. So I think Premier Eby and his team have to do a bit more of the calculus on this, because I don't think it's as black as white as he thinks it is. I actually think it makes him an outlier in causing a bit of a divide in the Federation, and I don't necessarily think this is a winning battle for him right now.
Well, we'll see. I should point out, just for sake of clarity, it's not a done deal. The ink hasn't dried. We're just told it's very close, so we'll keep our eyes on it. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the discussion, as always. Our front bench, Jamie Ellerton, Laura D'Angelo, Sharon Carr, and Sebastian Skamsky. Our takeaway is up after a short break.
There will be a tariff. Okay, the president has made that has made it very, very clear there will be a tariff structure between the U.S. and Canada. I've talked with the Canadian government and encouraged them to be, just to really work closely with us in going through that process and get into the lowest tariff bucket that the United States of America will have.
That's U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra speaking at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Conference in Ottawa today, being unequivocal. Even if we arrive at a deal with the United States on a sectoral basis, there will be a tariff. Aim for the lowest bucket, he said, saying that the UK, for example, has that bucket. That means at least a 10% tariff. Of course, negotiations are not on right now. And about a month ago, there was a widely reported story that Ambassador Hoekstra took aim very directly and in person at Ontario's representative in Washington. Here's what he had to say about that.
I was kind of passionate earlier this month about, that the deal got blown up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, because, the strategy was to put wins on the board. Okay,
for both countries, I hope.
Both countries. Okay, and that, this first deal was not. It's not first and only. It was, wins on the board. Demonstrate we can do wins for both countries, which we've been doing for 50 years.
And I will leave it there. I'm Vashi Kapelas. Thanks for watching Power Play tonight. Have a great rest of your evening.